Jasmine Crockett Confronts Jimmy Kimmel Lies. Iregaev. He goes silent as receipts hit the screen. The lights were too bright, too polished, too perfect. The kind of light that makes anything beneath it look clean, even when it's hiding something rotten. Jimmy Kimmel was mid-laugh. The audience, trained to respond like a metronome, followed his cue. It was a typical Tuesday night on Jimmy Kimmel Live until it wasn't. She walked in like no one expected her to. Jasmine Crockett, Texas congresswoman, courtroom trained, unflinching, unapologetic, wasn't there for the charm. She wasn't there for ratings. She was there with a portfolio tucked under her arm and a look that said, "Tonight, you don't control the story." From the moment she stepped into frame, something shifted, not in volume, but in temperature. The studio, usually simmering with late-night sarcasm, cooled noticeably. Her walk wasn't slow, but it was deliberate. No nerves, no showmanship, just gravity. Jimmy greeted her with his usual smirk, hand extended like he was still in control. She took it. Then she leaned in. "Thanks for having me." "Jimmy," she said, voice calm, "I thought we'd take a few minutes to talk about your past." And just like that, his smile cracked. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them. A line too casual, too soft, too loaded. In the control room, a producer froze mid-headset cue. The audience, the ones who came for jokes and late-night comfort food, stopped clapping. A few looked around, confused. Kimmel tried to recover, grinning wider. "Well, sure. We all have a past." He laughed, voice tilting upward, a practiced pivot. "That's what makes late night fun, right?" Jasmine didn't blink. "That's the thing," she replied, unbothered. "Sometimes the past isn't funny. Sometimes it's just exposed." The camera didn't cut away. The red light stayed on. This wasn't a setup. This was live. The portfolio on her lap hadn't moved. Yet. But her fingers rested on the leather spine like it was waiting to breathe. "You've done some evolving," she continued, "from bikinis on trampolines to monologues on morality, from impersonating black athletes in blackface to becoming a self-proclaimed conscience of America. It's been quite the arc." Kimmel's laugh came too quick. "I think most people would agree I've grown." She tilted her head. "Do they? Or is it just that the people who question you don't get the mic?" The room exhaled sharply. You could hear it. Then silence, and then whispers. In that stillness, Jasmine Crockett wasn't yelling. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't even raising her voice. She was cross-examining, calm, surgical, like she was back in court. "You've used this platform, week after week, to call Republican lawmakers liars, bigots, hypocrites. You've accused them of cruelty, of ignorance, of being morally bankrupt. You've cried on camera about healthcare and guns. You've called others monsters." He swallowed. She leaned forward. "And yet, in the early 2000s, when you were mocking women's bodies, when you were caricaturing black men for laughs, when you were donating money to politicians who fought against marriage equality, what exactly were you?" The screen behind them flickered. It hadn't been cleared by producers. But someone on Crockett's team had reached someone on the inside. The image popped into view. Jimmy Kimmel, blackface. 2003, Karl Malone's sketch. The audience gasped loudly. Even those who remembered tried to pretend they didn't. But there it was, in HD, on his own set. Kimmel stammered. "Those were different times." Crockett nodded once. Slowly, "Different times. Convenient phrase. Republicans you've mocked use that same excuse. You didn't accept it from them. Why should we accept it from you?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The camera caught the sweat at his temple. Somewhere backstage, someone had hit the silent alarm. Producers whispered. One reached for the commercial cut switch, but the red light stayed on. Jasmine was just getting started. "I came here tonight not to cancel you. Jimmy, I don't believe in cancel culture. I believe in equal standards, in memory, in accountability." She opened the portfolio. The first page, a printout of Kimmel's 2001 political donations, highlighted in yellow, "To Senator X," she said. "Opposed the Violence Against Women Act. Voted to defund Planned Parenthood. You gave him $5,000. She flipped again. Candidate Y. Voted against Medicare expansion. Called Dreamers illegal parasites. You sent him a check and hosted him at a fundraiser." More murmurs. Some in the audience weren't just shocked. They were confused. Because the man sitting across from her had sold them the opposite story for years. "I'm a comedian," Kimmel said. The line sounded rehearsed, tired. She looked at him. "No, Jimmy. You're a gatekeeper. And when you mock people's pain while hiding your own history behind punchlines, you're not telling jokes, you're performing protection. She paused, then she closed the portfolio. I believe people can change, she added, but I don't believe they should weaponize their evolution while denying others theirs. That line, the room stopped breathing. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't called for his job. She had just told the truth. In a room that wasn't used to hearing it from someone like her, Kimmel reached for a bottle of water. His hands weren't shaking, but they weren't steady either. The screen behind them went black again, but the image had already been burned. Not just the black face, but the look on his face when the mask slipped, and somewhere in the comment threads, the hashtags had already started. Jasmine sat back. The show wasn't over, but something had ended, and the audience could feel it. The screen behind them had gone black, but the silence it left behind wasn't empty. It was electric. Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his collar. His fingers brushed the edge of his tie, but he didn't straighten it. He didn't move much at all. The crowd, usually his second wind, his safety net, his echo chamber sat in a strange, suspended stillness. And Jasmine Crockett, she hadn't moved either. She didn't need to. Because when you've just burned through illusion with nothing but a stack of public records and one sentence of clarity, you don't rush the silence. You let it settle. You let it haunt. You let the air remember it. This isn't about me, Kimmel finally said, voice low, trying to summon control. My show, my job is to shine a light on people in power, to speak truth to power. Crockett raised one eyebrow, not in disbelief, but something closer to quiet disappointment. Jimmy, she said, tone steady, you are the power. The words didn't echo. They landed, hard, in the control room, a junior producer whispered. Should we cut? The lead shook his head. Not yet. On stage, Kimmel exhaled through his nose, trying to regroup. Look, I've already addressed the old stuff. The blackface, the man show, the jokes that wouldn't fly today. I've evolved, and I've used this platform to fight for good. Crockett nodded once. That's fair. But here's the difference. She reached into the portfolio again. The motion itself now made the room tense, like she was drawing a weapon. What she pulled out looked harmless, a single printed tweet. Here's what you said about Congressman Paul Gosar when someone dug up an offensive meme he posted 5 years earlier. She held it up. The tweet read, "This man is a national disgrace. Who lets someone like this near legislation? Resign. Clown." Then she flipped to another sheet. And this one about Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. After her Facebook post from 2012 was resurfaced, you wrote she didn't even need to finish. The audience knew, Jimmy knew. You called them disgraceful, unfit. Beyond redemption, she said, her voice never rising. You demanded accountability. You demanded resignation. You demanded consequences. Kimmel shifted in his seat. And yet, she continued, you sit here, wrapped in applause, protected by comedy, praised as a moral compass, while your own past is a catalog of the very things you condemn. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't gloat. She simply said, that's not growth. That's branding. The air dropped 10 degrees. It wasn't rage. It wasn't shouting. It was worse than that for a man like Jimmy Kimmel. It was clarity. Because Crockett wasn't calling him evil. She wasn't calling him fake. She was calling him convenient. A word that hits deeper when truth is on the table. She leaned back in her seat, giving him room to respond. And he tried. I just think it's different. He offered, when you're a comedian, your job is to push boundaries. And when you're in politics, your job is to lead. So, yes, I expect more from lawmakers. Jasmine blinked, and yet you chose to donate to them. She replied, to laugh with them, to prop them up. So what were you then? Jimmy A. comic, or a coward? He froze. The audience let out a low, collective breath, no laughter, just friction. And then, she did something no one expected. She turned to them, to the audience, to the people who had come for comedy and were now watching a reckoning unfold in real time. I want to be clear, she said. This isn't personal. I don't hate Jimmy Kimmel. I don't want his show taken down. I don't think mistakes mean you lose your voice forever. She held the portfolio close now, not like evidence, but like memory. I'm saying this because millions of Americans, many of them conservative, many of them people I don't even agree with, have been destroyed for saying things less inflammatory than what you once put on national television before social media even existed to hold you accountable. Kimmel didn't interrupt. He couldn't. People lose jobs. Families are doxxed. Lives are upended, she said. And not because they're monsters, but because they didn't evolve fast enough for the internet. Meanwhile, some voices are handed grace, applause, and full-page profiles about how far they've come. Her eyes never wavered. I believe in growth. I believe in change. But if we only extend that belief to people who agree with us politically, then what we're building isn't justice. She placed the portfolio on the desk between them. It landed with a soft thud. But what we're doing, she said, is weaponizing forgiveness. And suddenly, that was the story. It wasn't about Kimmel anymore. It was about the system that makes it so easy to cancel others while insulating those who fit a particular cultural script. Kimmel exhaled. Long, slow. I get it, he murmured. I do. Maybe you're right. The admission wasn't dramatic. It was barely audible. But it was real. And Jasmine Crockett didn't smile. Because this wasn't a gotcha moment. This wasn't a takedown. It was a mirror. And she'd held it long enough for everyone to see their reflection. In the front row, a woman dabbed at her eyes. On Twitter. The clip had already begun to trend. And Jimmy. He looked down, not in defeat, but in thought. For perhaps the first time on his own show, he was listening. And for the first time in a long time. Jimmy Kimmel didn't have a joke ready. No deflection, no laughter, no applause sign flashing desperately off stage. Just a man staring into the reality of his contradictions, live, on his own set, with the camera still rolling. Jasmine Crockett didn't break the moment. She didn't lean in to finish him off. That wasn't the point. She let the silence stay. Let the weight of what had been said do its own work. The truth didn't need more volume. It had already spoken loud enough in its stillness. Kimmel rubbed his hands together, then rested them on the desk. His voice came out quieter than usual, stripped of performance. I think I've been trying to do the right thing, he said. I thought that by taking a stand on issues, by speaking out against injustice, I was helping. You were, Jasmine replied, without sarcasm. But you were also protecting yourself while burying others. She didn't say it with judgment. She said it with clarity. He nodded slightly, the kind of nod people give when they're finally seeing the part of the mirror they used to avoid, and just when the moment felt like it might close into something reflective. Crockett shifted in her chair and opened the portfolio again, not with aggression, with precision. There's one more thing, she said, calmly. Kimmel looked up, more alert now, but not defensive. Maybe resigned, maybe just curious. Jasmine pulled out a transcript highlighted in blue. This is a segment from 2010, a monologue you did about a female candidate running for office. Your punchline was, and I quote, "I'd vote for her if she promised to run in a bikini." Gasps, audible, sharp. Even now, in a post-Me Too era, the crowd wasn't prepared to hear it quoted so flatly. They remembered the joke, but memory softens. Transcripts don't. Kimmel closed his eyes for half a second. I was an idiot, he muttered. Crockett didn't disagree, but she didn't condemn either. You were a mirror of what the culture rewarded, she said. And that's exactly why it matters who holds the microphone. Because too often, the people mocked on these stages never got the chance to grow in front of an audience. She let that land, then reached for the final envelope. 3 former staffers, women, 2 writers, 1 producer, all worked on the Man Show. They submitted signed statements, not for legal action, not for attention. But because when they heard I was coming here, they asked if you'd ever told the truth about what the workplace felt like. The audience held its collective breath. Kimmel sat back, jaw tightening. I didn't know they. He stopped, because maybe he did. Maybe he just hadn't wanted to remember. Jasmine slid the statements across the desk. She didn't read them aloud. That wasn't necessary. She wasn't there to humiliate. She was there to present. And now the table wasn't a set anymore. It was an evidentiary bench. Kimmel didn't touch the papers. Not yet. But the audience didn't need them read aloud. They saw enough in how he didn't reach for them. This is not about character assassination, Jasmine said, eyes still on him. It's about accountability, not just for you, for all of us. Because when we decide that only our enemies deserve judgment and only our friends deserve grace, we're not building justice. We're building a church of bias, silence, then a slow, deliberate wave of applause, not loud, not energetic, just real. Like something breaking open in a room long sealed shut. I think it's time for a break, Kimmel said, barely above a whisper. But Crockett leaned forward, voice soft but firm. Not just yet. She turned to the audience again, and for the first time, it didn't feel like Jimmy's show. It felt like something else entirely. "You see, I didn't come here to ruin a career," she told them. "I came here because people like Jimmy, people with platforms, with power, have the ability to shape public memory. And if we allow them to edit out their own contradictions while exaggerating everyone else's, then we're not getting truth. We're getting branding disguised as courage." The lights felt different now, warmer, brighter, like they weren't just illuminating the set, but everything hiding beneath it. "And here's what matters most," she said. "Growth is real, redemption is sacred, but neither of them mean a damn thing unless we apply them across the board." The room was still, no jokes, no music cue, no commercial cut, just truth, center stage, and nowhere to run. Kimmel finally picked up the statements, glanced at them, his mouth parted slightly, reading a line, then another, then folding the pages gently. He nodded, once. "I don't know how to fix all of that," he said quietly. Jasmine looked him dead in the eye. "You don't have to fix everything," she said. "You just have to stop pretending none of it happened while demanding everyone else be perfect." A few more claps, a murmur of agreement. The tide was turning not against Jimmy, but against the performance that too often replaced substance. And in that moment, on live television, with nothing rehearsed and everything exposed, the audience did something rare. They stopped watching a show and started witnessing a reckoning. The screen behind them remained blank. No cue cards, no graphics, just the echo of Crockett's final line. Not shouted, just placed, like a gavel. "Truth isn't partisan, but grace. It better be universal." The line hung in the air like a verdict, not a soundbite, not a slogan, but a sentence that felt like it had waited years to be spoken, and even longer to be heard. Jimmy Kimmel sat still, the folded pages in his hands now quiet reminders of a version of himself he could no longer bury beneath laughter. He didn't nod this time. He didn't offer a clever comeback. There was no cut to commercial to save him, and for the first time in the history of his show, he wasn't the one holding the room. Jasmine Crockett was, not with volume, not with venom, but with consistency. And in the silence that followed, the audience began to shift not just in their seats, but in their assumptions. They hadn't come for this, but now they couldn't look away. Someone coughed nervously in the back row. A few began to clap, hesitant, unsure if they were witnessing a takedown or a transformation. Jasmine didn't acknowledge it. She wasn't done. "You know what the real danger is, Jimmy?" she asked quietly. "It's not the hypocrisy. It's how normalized it's become for people in power, especially on our side, to act like they're immune to the standards they demand from everyone else." Kimmel's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in discomfort, because he knew what was coming. She continued, turning slightly to face the audience again. "Because when someone like me calls out the GOP for suppressing votes or criminalizing healthcare, the response from liberal media is applause, retweets, think pieces." She paused. "But when I ask that same media to apply scrutiny to itself, suddenly I'm divisive. I'm a problem. I'm making it harder for us to win." She raised her hand slowly, palm open. "I support this party. I vote Democrat, but I don't worship branding. I worship truth. And if we don't clean our own house, if we keep pretending that political alignment automatically equals moral superiority, then we're just the other side's mirror, with better fonts." A ripple of stunned laughter broke through. Small, uncertain, guilty, but real. Even Kimmel gave a half smile, the first in minutes. It didn't reach his eyes. Crockett let the pause linger before finishing her point. "I didn't come here to destroy you, Jimmy. I came here to remind your audience and mine that integrity doesn't need a party." Then she said something no one expected. "You're not the only one with receipts." And with that, she reached into her portfolio one last time, not to expose Jimmy, but to expose the system. She pulled out a thick envelope. "Tonight, I brought statements," she said, "not just from your staff, but from former producers, interns, and contributors from 3 major liberal media outlets, ones that often praise accountability, but enforce silence behind the scenes." The room froze again. "This isn't just about you. This is about what we've built." She turned the envelope outward so the camera could catch the logo on the front, a major progressive news network. One known for fiery monologues, urgent banners, and late-night exposés. "But they didn't want these stories aired," Jasmine said, her voice sharper now, more deliberate. "Because the wrong people were the ones doing harm. People with blue check marks. People who post BLM hashtags. People who believe women until the woman works under them." Kimmel leaned forward, stunned. "You're saying this goes beyond..." She nodded before he could finish. It always has. Now the audience wasn't just listening, they were processing. Because Crockett wasn't playing defense for the GOP. She wasn't even playing offense. She was holding up a mirror and everyone was reflected. And I'm tired, she said, more quietly now. Tired of defending a team that thinks moral high ground is automatic. Tired of being told that, if I call out my own, I'm helping the enemy. You want to know what helps the enemy? She looked directly into the camera, pretending we have no flaws. The feed didn't cut. The red light stayed on. And somewhere in the control booth, a senior producer mouthed the words, "Let it roll." Because what was happening now wasn't television. It was a moment. You say you want justice, Jasmine said, then start by applying it evenly. To the people you agree with, to the causes you love, to the voices you platform. She exhaled slowly. To yourself. It was too quiet. Not dead, just different. Even the audience understood now. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about demanding a level of honesty that the political machine, left or right, was rarely built to withstand. Kimmel swallowed. He finally looked up again. I've never been confronted like this, he said, his voice no longer performative. You're not the only one who should be, Jasmine replied. This country's exhausted, not just by Republicans, by everyone who claims to be a savior but refuses to be a student. He nodded. This time, it was full, a nod of admission. And that's when something remarkable happened. The audience began to clap, but not in that late night, prompted, we're supposed to kind of way. They clapped because they had witnessed something, not a takedown, not a cancellation, a confrontation of culture. And Jasmine Crockett didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't bask in the applause. She simply folded the envelope, returned it to her bag, and sat back, still, unbothered, ready for the next question if there even was one left to ask. But Kimmel didn't ask. He just said, thank you, not because he liked what happened, but because he knew it had to. And across the internet, on X, on TikTok, on Discord servers and Reddit threads, the clip had already exploded. Not because it was viral, because it was necessary. And America, in its fractured partisan fatigue, had just heard something rare. Accountability with no sides. Just truth. And the cost of ignoring it? He said, thank you. And for once, it didn't sound like a closing line. It sounded like surrender, not to defeat, but to reality. Jimmy Kimmel sat in the glow of the studio lights, lights designed to flatter, to soften, to erase the harsh edges of truth. But now, under Jasmine Crockett's calm gaze and the weight of his own acknowledgement, the lights didn't flatter, they exposed. The audience's applause, quiet and unscripted, had faded again into a kind of respectful silence. A silence not born from awkwardness, but from understanding. There were no winners here, only witnesses. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't flinch under the attention. She didn't shift the weight of the moment to make it more comfortable. She sat in it, fully, letting the discomfort of truth do its work. Then, gently, she spoke. You're welcome. The words were small, but they weren't soft. They were deliberate, precise, as if she'd just returned something that had been borrowed a long time ago perspective. What followed wasn't a debate. It wasn't a comeback. It wasn't even television anymore. It was reflection. And that, on this stage, in this country, amid the noise, was revolutionary. Kimmel looked down at his hands, still holding the folded staff statements, still unsure whether to keep them close or let them go. They told me, he said, eyes not meeting hers yet, that this would be tough. Who's they? She asked, not to accuse, but to clarify. He looked up. My team, the producers, the network. Jasmine nodded slowly. And did they tell you why he was quiet for a beat? Because you'd bring the receipts. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker in her eyes. The kind of flicker that says, and I did. But that's not why it was tough. Kimmel continued. It's tough because, you're right, the air seemed to shift again gently. This time, not with pressure, but with release. I've spent years criticizing hypocrisy, he said, pointing fingers, trying to be the guy who calls it like it is. But I never really turned the lens back on myself. Not like this. Crockett tilted her head slightly. Most people don't. It's not comfortable. He chuckled dryly. No, it's not. She leaned forward, voice steady. Growth never is. For a moment, they just sat there. Two people. No scripts, no talking points. Just two Americans, one in a suit, one in a blazer sitting in the rawness of honesty. Then she said something that shifted the tone again. You know, this could have gone differently. Kimmel's brow lifted slightly. How so? I could have come out swinging, she said. I could have yelled. I could have tried to embarrass you. I could have made this about winning the argument, or going viral. You kind of still went viral, he joked, half-hearted. She gave him a soft look. Yeah, but not because I shouted, because I didn't. The audience murmured again, not laughter, not gasps, just acknowledgement, and in that space, Jasmine did what she came here to do, not just confront one man, but challenge the mechanism he was part of. You see, she said, now turning once more to the crowd, the danger isn't just in what's said, it's in what's repeated, what's rewarded, what's allowed. She gestured around the studio. This platform, it shapes narratives. It defines what's acceptable, what's forgivable, what's funny, and for a long time, what it taught people was this. If you say the wrong thing and you're conservative, you're canceled. If you say the same thing and you're liberal, you're complicated. A long, heavy pause. I don't accept that. Neither, it seemed, did the crowd. Some began to nod. A few whispered, that's true under their breath. And in the control room, a silent directive was given. Do not cut away, because the reckoning had moved past Jimmy. Now it was about everyone. Crockett continued, her tone softer now, but no less direct. I fight for progressive values, she said. I believe in climate action, reproductive freedom, racial justice, economic equity, but none of that gives us the right to wear moral superiority like armor while ignoring the damage we've done. She turned to Jimmy again. You've been a part of progress, but you've also been protected by its performance. He looked down again, this time, not in shame, but in clarity. What do I do now? He asked. She didn't hesitate. You start by not making excuses. You keep telling the truth, not just the easy ones, but the messy ones, the ones about yourself, your friends, your industry, your audience. Then she leaned back, the smallest smile forming. And maybe you stop pretending comedians are just comedians. That one hit, he laughed. But it wasn't deflective, it was real. And for the first time all night, Jimmy Kimmel didn't look like a host. He looked like a man learning publicly, imperfectly, but honestly. And Jasmine. She didn't press further. She didn't escalate. She let it breathe, because she knew what the moment needed wasn't more fire. It was space. Space for reflection, space for change, space for a country sick of binaries and begging for balance. Back in the audience, a young woman pulled out her phone not to record, but to type. A tweet. This wasn't a takedown. This was a takedown of the performance, of all of it. Jasmine Crockett. The moment, that tweet, like many others, would soon go viral. But not because it was shocking, because it was true. On Reddit, someone posted Jasmine Crockett walked into Jimmy Kimmel's house and held a moral masterclass. No shouting, no canceling, just clarity. And in offices, classrooms, and family group chats across the country, people weren't debating the moment. They were talking about what it meant. Meanwhile, in Studio 5B, the red light finally dimmed. The segment had ended, but the echo had only begun. The red light dimmed, but no one moved, not the crew, not the audience, not even Jimmy. It was the end of the segment, technically, but it didn't feel like anything had ended. Because when the lights dim after something real, something unfiltered, something honest, what remains isn't applause, it's aftermath. Jimmy Kimmel sat quietly, still absorbing the conversation that had just unfolded, not over him, not around him, but through him. His stage had become a courtroom, his desk a witness stand, and Jasmine Crockett hadn't shown up to perform. She'd shown up to recalibrate. And now, as the credits queued up backstage and producers whispered about timing, what lingered was not scandal. It was something deeper, a recalibration of trust, trust in truth, trust in accountability, and trust that maybe, just maybe someone on television would finally say what the rest of the country had been feeling for years. We're not interested in perfection anymore. We're desperate for consistency. Off stage, someone finally moved. A floor manager glanced at the cue card in their hand, then at Jimmy, then at Jasmine. There were still 4 minutes left on the clock before the next segment, an interview with an actor, a comedy sketch. But nothing felt appropriate anymore. The machine couldn't just start up again, not after what had just happened. Jimmy cleared his throat and turned to Jasmine. Not the way hosts turn to wrap up a conversation, but the way someone turns when they know something important needs to be said, and they don't quite know how to say it. I hope you'll come back, he said softly. She looked at him, still calm. I didn't come to make headlines. She replied, I came because the truth deserved a seat. He nodded, and it got one. The audience, sensing the shift, broke into a rare kind of applause. It wasn't polite, it wasn't prompted, it was human. Earned, not for Jimmy, not for Jasmine, but for the moment itself. For the first time in what felt like a decade of partisan chaos, someone had broken the performance cycle. Not with anger, not with applause lines, with truth, and it had landed. Cut to the next morning. Clips from the confrontation were already flooding timelines. Not in meme format, not as snark, but as full segments, the kind people actually watched in their entirety. On MSNBC, analysts debated whether Jasmine Crockett had set a new precedent for how Democrats handle liberal media bias. On Fox News, a rare mix of grudging respect and strategic panic. On CNN, a panel of former staffers from late-night shows admitted, and for the first time, that a cultural reckoning might be overdue not on stage, but behind it. And on TikTok, one clip reigned, "You've been a part of progress, but you've also been protected by its performance." 10 million views in 12 hours. 3 words trended on X Truth, without permission. The hashtags varied. Or Crockett moment. Oh, not just comedy, accountable left. But the impact was singular. Jasmine hadn't just walked into a lion's den, she hadn't roared. She'd made the lion ask why the cage was locked in the first place. And it spread, not just through headlines, but through culture. College professors assigned the segment in media ethics classes. Activist circles began sharing her final quote, "If we only extend grace to those who agree with us, we're not practicing justice, we're practicing favoritism." Even longtime Democratic strategists, used to defending every liberal institution with muscle memory, were now rethinking their lines. Because Crockett hadn't betrayed her party, she had strengthened it by forcing it to look in the mirror, by proving that integrity isn't loyalty to a logo, it's loyalty to principle. 2 days later, Jimmy Kimmel released a public statement. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't spin, it was unusually quiet, just 3 paragraphs. In it, he acknowledged the contradiction, thanked Jasmine, and promised to spend more time listening than lecturing. The statement didn't go viral, but the moment already had. And Jasmine. She didn't hold a press tour. She didn't ride the wave. She returned to Capitol Hill. When asked by a reporter about the confrontation, she shrugged gently. "It wasn't about me. It was about all of us. Holding the mirror up, even when we're afraid of what we'll see." Then she walked away. No mic drop, no victory lap, just a woman who came with a folder full of facts, and left behind a folder full of reflection. 6 months later, something began to shift in late-night television. Not instantly, but subtly. The jokes got sharper, more accountable. Segments included more than just punchlines, they carried nuance. Writers' rooms began bringing in researchers, not just for fact-checking, but for context. And audiences, they started demanding it. The performance had been broken, because someone chose to speak, not louder, but clearer. In a world obsessed with spectacle, Jasmine Crockett reminded America that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is tell the truth and wait for the silence to work. And in that silence, a nation asked itself, what do we expect from those who speak for us? Not perfection, not charisma, just courage and consistency. Because that night, in front of millions, a quiet voice didn't just confront a host. She confronted a culture, and the echo still hasn't stopped.